This is the Fantastic Books Podcast,
the fantasy and sci-fi book review podcast for fantasy fanatics, book nerds, and lovers of lore and stories.
covering some of the most loved fantasy series as well as brand new novels.
With your hosts, Anna
And Sam. Let's see what we're reading this week.
I'm Anna.
And I'm Sam.
And we're your hosts on this fantasy book review podcast. We'll be exploring some of our old favorites, as well as reading and discovering new stories along our journey.
So join us as we delve into our favorite adventures set in the lands of Middle-earth, Tamaric, and Allegatia, analyze fan theories, and discuss some of the best, and maybe the worst characters this genre has to offer on our podcast, Fantastic Books and How to Read Them. We're live! Hey viewers, this is Sam.
And this is Anna.
And this is our podcast, Fantastic Books and How to Read Them. And today we're presenting our favorite fantasy series of all time, The Name of the Wind, Book 1, which is part of the Kingkiller Chronicles.
By Patrick Rothfuss. Books came out in 2006 or 7, the first one came out. It's a trilogy. We are still waiting on the third book, but the first two have been absolutely amazing and like no other fantasy book I ever read. So I think that's why we really wanted to start the podcast with these, just because they are some of our favorite books, and I've read them multiple times. You've read them even more than I have. And every time we go back through them, there's more and more little details that you pick up on, more and more like hidden meaning, double meaning, really intricate storylines that are all woven throughout. So I think it's going to be a really great way to kick off the whole podcast.
And kind of the workflow that we're going to try to accomplish through this podcast is we'll be going over several chapters at a time and not necessarily narrate, but summarize what's going on through the plot. We'll then share parts that we really enjoyed and maybe certain characters that we like.
And then the more we get into this book, the more there obviously is going to be to talk about in terms of fan theories and pieces of information that were mentioned way earlier that come back up later. So we'll try and synthesize everything pretty good for you. But today we're going to be going over chapters 1 through 7. Since we already have read this book, we know where to break it. And these are a really good introduction to the entire world, to the characters, before you get into the actual meat of the story. So that's what we'll be starting with today. Are you ready to jump right into it?
Oh yeah, I'm so excited for this.
Alright, so this book starts off with a prologue called A Silence of Three Parts. I think this is a really interesting prologue because a lot of prologues in fantasy either give you a character's something early in their life or their parents' lives that kind of sets them on their path of destiny, or some strange event that happens, a political event set in motion that your farm boy comes into contact with later,
Yeah, it kind of thrusts that main character into the action that sets them on their adventure.
Yeah, so a lot of the times, here's the adventure, and then we'll reel back out to, here's this character who seems like they have a boring life. But this one is actually kind of sets the setting and the tone of the book.
Oh, this prologue's really unique and interesting because it one part foreshadows and is very cryptic, but it also really hooks the reader in, and you kind of buckle up and you really don't know what kind of ride you're getting thrown into.
And it comes back multiple times throughout the book. They kind of reprise the prologue's structure, they mentioned the three parts multiple times throughout the book, so it's pretty interesting. I'm not really sure how much meaning it has in terms of content. I think they're just kind of setting the stage for you, but I think it's really beautifully written. It does kind of set the stage in terms of the way the book is written. It's a story within a story. So the book follows the main character, Kavoth, who is narrating the story, and he spends 3 days, Book 1 is day 1, Book 2 is day 2, and Book 3 is day 3, telling the story of his life. But he's obviously at the end of that point of his life, so he's recounting. So this is kind of telling you where he's at now, and it's this kind of very, eerie, dreary, kind of
very dismal
backwater town. So that's what the prologue sets you up for. And they talk about, at the very end, the sound of the man who's waiting to die, who I can only assume is the main character, Kavoth, but obviously...
Well, it's a lot of this writing. There's a lot of double meaning and a lot of interpretation with the writing. So although it originally kind of appears to be clear-cut, I imagine that these prologue and epilogues that are used throughout all 3 books are going to have varied meanings once it all kind of gets pieced together.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can actually jump right into the kind of thick of the plot. So we're in this backwater town, in an inn that's actually called the Waystone Inn, and our character, Kavoth, who's going by the name of Coat in this town, he runs this inn, and it's around supper time, and there's a kind of a group of patrons.
Like his regulars.
Yeah, like the usual crowd that's over at the inn.
So it's Old Cobb, Graham, Jake, and Shep. And when I first read the book, I thought this was kind of the main plot, so I really tried to focus in on, like, learning Graham, Jake, and Shep, and, like, who was who, and giving each person a bit of attention at the beginning, but they don't seem to be particularly important to the story, so they're there just to kind of provide basic content and information about the world, so I wouldn't focus too much on who they are.
Yeah, they're definitely more accessory pieces, and just... I really just hate Old Cobb. He is every, like, old man somebody knows in their life that is just, like, stubborn and way very full of themselves and arrogant and just has no business being this annoying.
I think they described him as, like, eating like a lifelong bachelor and just being that, like, guy who thinks he knows best because he's, like, the oldest.
Yeah,
and
he's
I
the most
just
experienced.
really don't care for him. He does have a lot of information that moves the plot and the world building along, but other than that, he's
the worst.
He sucks as a character.
So basically, we have our 5 characters, these 5 guys at the Waystone Inn. They're basically having their supper, and Old Cobb doing what Old Cobb does best, telling stories. Now, it's kind of set up almost like a campfire story. They're basically telling fantasy tales about the world around them.
It'd be like if someone was telling, like, American tales of, like, Paul Bunyan or,
yeah, like Tall Tales.
Tall Tales, yeah, like Johnny Appleseed. Kind of like, they're in your world, but not really.
Yes.
But he's telling a story about, like, their main hero in the world, Tarberlin the Great, and this group of enemies called the Chandrian. And these are really important characters in terms of, like, the structure of the world and the structure of the conflict for the entire series. So take note whenever they come up.
Yes. And so I think that's one thing as this book develops that's really fascinating, as a lot of times in these books, stories will come up. And in my mind at first when I was reading this, it kind of reminded me of Lord of the Rings, where you'd have like a song or poem or story happen within the story. And you're like, oh, that's a cool piece of literature they decided to incorporate into the world as kind of like an art piece.
Yeah, those were more like, because Tolkien had created such like a rich world with its own history and languages, that's why they were included. But they don't really affect the plot of the main characters, whereas in this series, any kind of like story, song, rhyme, folk tale, folklore, anything like that is where there's like hidden nuggets of truth about the world.
Yes, and that's what's really cool about these books, because upon the first read, you take it kind of at face value, and you're like, that's interesting and cool, but, you know, not really reading more into it than what it appears to be on the page. And then, if you're like me, and I've read these books about 3 times each now, everything is significant. Every little detail actually has a little bit of weight that you discover upon the second read. And then even upon the third read, there's even more that you kind of took for granted and took at face value upon reading that you realize either plays into the plot later on or just is a foreshadowing device or just part of the world itself. And it's really what makes these books so readable and fascinating.
But yeah, so in this opening story, Old Cobb is talking about the Chandrian, and like I said, they're a main plot point. And all that's really important here is that they talk about the signs of the Chandrian, which one is blue fire, and a few more get mentioned throughout these first few chapters, but these are important to remember because, as you learn, the Chandrian are kind of like these mythical enemies. No one really knows, like, their purpose or what they look like, but they have these signs that come up in folklore that tend to be, there's consistencies and differences, and it's one of those interesting things where it's like parsing out the truth.
Yeah, and like, I guess full background of these books as we go through, you kind of discover that this world is very much pre any modern marvel of technology. It's very like horse and wagon technology, simple blacksmithing, real like work with your hands type technologies.
There is magic, but it's written in a more of a logical way, so this is a fantasy book where there's not like just unchecked magic running rampant, or like, I don't know, a lot of fantasy books have magic or magical creatures that don't have any kind of limitations to them. And this one is a very, like, logical approach to magic, which makes it different, too. But, anyway, as we go through the first chapter, the action from the story gets interrupted almost immediately when another man comes in, Carter, and he's got a bundle with this, like, stone-like spider inside of it.
Yeah, so as our 5 favorite characters are regaling a story around the table and drinking their beers at the Waystone Inn, Carter bursts through the door. He's ashen-faced and trembling and holding this clothed bundle.
He's all
covered in blood and cuts. And everyone obviously is startled to see their friend in, like, such distress. And Carter's just kind of in shock, saying he's fine. And when he, unloads his bundle onto the floor, it's this dense, as you were saying, stone spider-like creature that has these razor blades for feet.
And then Kvothe immediately recognizes it and calls it a scrael, or scraling, which is kind of interesting because that's something from Norse mythology, but that's not really related.
Everyone else is freaking out because this is not a creature typical to this, like, land or world. No one has seen anything like this, so they're all, like, genuinely, justifiably terrified.
Yeah, and immediately he's like, I don't know what this is. Someone just told me about it. So clearly he knows what's going on.
And he's playing dumb.
He's very concerned about what this is, and then kind of convinces everyone that it's a demon, and that they should treat it with caution. Oh, he convinces them it's a demon by having them test it. So, in this world, from mythology, they can test demons by iron, clean fire, or the name of God. And so they use a piece of iron. Kvothe, like, puts the iron on the scrael, and it makes this big, like, crackling sound. So he's like,
as if it's burning the creature.
Yeah, so he's like, aha, it must be a demon. Yep. Mm-hmm. Which, like, I'm not entirely sure what happened, but what I think is that he used a bit of magic to, like, make this kind of smoke and mirrors to get everyone to believe it's a demon and dispose of this properly. But it's also kind of a cover story for, like, he can't know what it is, but he wants them to at least, like, handle it with caution.
Yes.
They end up burning it with what is the fire made of? Rowan wood?
So, it's, like, there's a whole rhyme that they have in this chapter, but basically it's rowan, ash, and elm wood.
Yes.
And so it creates a hot and pure enough fire to basically, like, incinerate this creature and leave no trace and just completely eviscerate or just get rid of it.
Yep. So he comes back from that and is talking to his apprentice, Bast. And this is the first time we're introduced to him. But Bast is very concerned about the scrael as well. He wanted to make sure that everything was disposed of properly, that nobody kept any pieces of the body behind, and that it was, like, completely eviscerated.
Right. Just as far as characters go, Boss is absolutely awesome. He's just, like, the clever, witty, charismatic,
kind of rascally.
Youthful, just
he's
like that
great.
Perfect apprentice to Coat, or really known as Kvothe.
He's a good foil. He's kind of, I think...
My young ward, like, he's awesome.
Yeah. He reminds me a lot of, like, what Kvothe saw in himself as a young person.
Yeah, totally.
So, but we're not really sure what Kvothe is supposed to be teaching him. They're kind of paired up, but it's not clear why or how they know each other.
Right. Up until this point, we're just under the impression that Bast has been taken under Kvothe's tutelage as an apprentice in hopes, I believe, to teach him more of the arcanum arts that he learns at the university.
Yep, and I think that brings us to the end. Chapter 1. Chapter 2 is called A Beautiful Day. It's a very quick chapter, and all it really does is introduce us to another character, Chronicler.
My boy.
So, as I said...
I don't know why. I just like Chronicler.
He's not even that big of a character.
No.
As I said before, this story is the story of Kvothe telling his life story, so it's a story within a story. And Chronicler is the person who's writing that story down. So we get a quick introduction to him. He is traveling. He's trying to meet up with a character named Scarpy, who we come across later in the books. And he is robbed by a band of ex-soldiers. So the ex-soldiers are there to kind of show you not only...
There's a war clearly happening.
Yeah, there's a war happening. There's deserters. There's, like, some political instability because people aren't really... If people are deserting, that means they're not following the king or the queen.
It's a war that people aren't agreeing with, and more importantly, it's showing that the roads to civilization aren't safe. So these are times of strife for everybody.
Yep, and he seems to be on the edge of civilization. He gets his horse stolen and later has difficulty finding a new one because he's out so far that, you know, everybody needs their horses. There's nothing to spare where he is. But I just kind of like this chapter. I think he's a witty character. He's definitely funny when they talk about how he, like, bakes some coins into some bread so that nobody finds his, like, backup money. And he talks about knowing exactly the right amount of money to let people rob you so they don't get too greedy versus having too little so they start, like, really rifling through all your stuff.
Yeah, so, like, just to backtrack for a moment, it's interesting because Chronicler is the epitome of, like, book nerd. He's not brawny. He doesn't even attempt to resist this, like, ambush from these mercenaries, ex-soldiers. So he straight up gives away his coin, and then they go through his valuables and take what they want. But then these mercenaries kind of give them their old stuff, so he's not without, which is kind of diplomatic. It's a really unique way to be robbed.
It's weird. I always feel bad when he talks about that, like, blue shirt he bought that he didn't even have a chance to wear.
Oh, I know. It's such a bummer. He's like, my one good shirt. Like,
I know. It's such a bummer. His only, like, nice thing to wear.
I think, yes, it was really clever how this is written, where there's, like, a little aside that you were mentioning where he's talking about after the robbing's kind of all said and done, like, you gotta know just the right amount of money to have on you if you're gonna get robbed. Because if you have too little, they're gonna keep searching all your stuff for more because they think that you're hiding it. Or if you have too much, they're gonna get greedy and really just keep going through your stuff. So it's kind of just useless information, but just interesting perspective to read. And you were saying before, yeah, like, he hides his money all over in little spots, whether it's his shoes or, like, a loaf of stale bread, or he keeps, like, a silver talent, which is, like, a form of their currency in this book, in a bottle of ink because he's a scribe, which is just, it's unnecessary information, but it's wicked cool, and I just love, like, that's a detail within this.
I like that he almost considers it, like, his lucky little spot now because no one's ever found it.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that's pretty much, all that really happens in this chapter.
He gets robbed.
Definitely.
It's a sucky day.
Has a bit of a rough start.
So he's onward, horseless, and heading towards the middle of nowhere.
Yep, he's heading towards a town called Treya, but as we quickly find out, he encounters Kvothe along the way.
Chapter 3, Wood Inward. So, with this chapter, we see Kvothe back at the Waystone Inn, and he actually gets a package from the character Graham, who's a woodworker, and it's basically a mounting scabbard for a sword. And it's this really expensive dark wood that doesn't burn, and it had been engraved with the word folly on it. And Kvothe decides to hang the scabbard and sword right above the bar inside the inn. Boss, Kvothe's apprentice, is almost aghast and surprised that Kvothe would do something like this.
Yeah, he's really concerned, not only because people are going to ask about it, but I think he's worried it's a little out of character for, like, their cover. And in the very, very beginning, they mention when Graham's dropping off the package that Kvothe's looking kind of hollow and empty, and then he receives this and kind of, like, rashly decides he's going to put it up on the wall where everyone can see. So I think what's happening is he's kind of losing hope or, like, losing stamina where he is in hiding, or where he is at the Waystone Inn right now. And he's decided he's, you know, he doesn't care quite as much as he used to about keeping his cover. So he's going to put this up on the wall. He talks about, like, making the best decisions he made were ones where he stopped thinking. So I think he's definitely kind of at a crossroads internally with where he is now, kind of becoming at the end of his story.
Right. And I think the big thing with this, as a reader, when you're first encountering this part of the plot, you get the impression that Kvothe, who's going by the name Kote, is someone of great importance, who's maintaining a low profile in a town that's in the middle of nowhere, but you're not sure why or what he's done that's causing him to kind of want to remain low.
And you're also not sure if it's a self-inflicted hiding for, like, self-preservation, like, people could be after him, or if, like, he's put himself there because he thinks he's too dangerous, or if he's been exiled.
So there's a lot of unanswered information about it, but we get the impression from Kavoth's attitude up until this point. He seems very defeated.
He's kind of, like, lost his will to live, almost.
Yeah,
like, he's
kind of
going through the motions, but not really. There's nothing that's new or exciting. He has no, like, magic or music in his life anymore, and it's very boring.
Right. So later on in the day, there's actually a group of people that are traveling on the roads that end up staying here at the Waystone Inn.
And you can see as soon as he's busy, like, serving them and talking and laughing and, like, singing, he comes back to life again. So you get this little glimpse of how he used to be. Yes,
the spark of him is reawakened, and there's a liveliness to him, and in that moment, Boss sees that Kavoth is only, in this part of his life, he's only in his early 30s. And he is so, like, vivacious in this moment and full of life that he forgets that his teacher is so young, considering how worn down he's been acting as of late.
Yep. The people who end up coming to the inn, there's a couple of really important things that I'd like to bring up. One is, there's a tanner who comes to town, or a tinker. The tinkers seem to be these, like, very interesting characters in the series. They're kind of viewed as, like, a little bit mystical and on the edges of society.
Yes, they're basically traveling salesmen that have everything in a giant pack, and they bring news of the road with them, and they're treated in a high regard.
They tend to have, like, things that wouldn't be typically available
in regular shops.
Yeah, they're almost like a traveling pawn shop. Like, the things that they have are very strange. It's not like, oh, I'm selling, like,
unique wares.
Flour and, like, groceries or just, like, pots and pans. Like, they just have kind of whatever they've come across along the road.
And it's very understood across everyone within this world that you always treat a tinker with respect and that you take their advice very seriously.
Yeah, they're very worldly. Because they do travel so much, so they're definitely a character to be respected.
But anyway, so there's all these kids that are with this group of travelers and the tinker that are visiting the Waystone Inn, and these kids are singing a song that has to do with the Chandrian.
Yep. So like I said earlier, a lot of songs or chants have secret information hidden in them. And this one it describes a couple of the Chandrian and their signs. So, in the opening one, they talk about blue fire, which was the one that was mentioned in the opening story. And then in the second verse of the song, they talk about a man who has black eyes. So, we can assume that that's a description of one of the Chandrian. And then in the third verse, there is the man without a face. So these are a couple of descriptions we get of the Chandrian. As you go through the book, you'll pick up more and more to kind of build out these, like, descriptions of them and understand what they look like and what their abilities are and what their signs are. But blue fire tends to be, like, the most ubiquitous sign of the Chandrian.
So, as the night progresses, we have this group that ends up renting rooms and stables at the Waystone Inn. And everyone is kind of just enjoying the wares of the inn. They're having dinner, and everyone's drinking.
It seems really cozy. I always think of the Lord of the Rings movie when they're at the Prancing Pony, and like everyone's like having a really good time, and it's like there's like a big fire, and it's warm, and everyone's just like kind of dancing and carousing. It seems really fun,
very lively.
Yeah, so that's kind of the impression I'm getting.
And so amidst all this, the like good vibes and everything that's happening, one of the patrons actually approaches Kavoth and recognizes him and addresses him as Kavoth, in which he tells this man that he's mistaken, that he's actually named Coat, not Kavoth.
But the guy, like, kind of presses it. He's like, oh, you know, I heard you sing once, that's how I recognized you.
Yes, you're Kavoth the Bloodless, the man pressed on. This guy then kind of keeps going on about details about a place in Imre where Kavoth apparently killed someone by a fountain, and there was a bunch of cobblestones that were all destroyed and shattered.
Yeah, so I think this is probably hinting at, like, the culmination of the series, like, this, like, great big thing that Kavoth does in the end, which, I mean, I'm assuming he kills somebody very important, but the fact that they can't fix it makes me think that there's, like, some crazy magic involved.
Yeah, this is clearly, like, a huge, like, event.
Yeah, and I think this is, like, why Kvothe is... I mean, he's famous for many things, but I think this is, like, the pinnacle of his actions.
Right.
And I think it's probably why he's now in hiding, or laying low at the Waystone Inn, but I'm not too sure.
Yeah, so Kvothe, or Kote, as he's going by, then kind of plays dumb. He's like, you think I'm the Kvothe? So clearly his reputation is just preceding him to such a point where he has to literally pretend he isn't who he is.
But he's also a very good actor. As we see, he is raised in a troupe of actors, so, like, in this space where he's pretending to be someone who he's not and, like, faking it, he actually has really, really good acting skills. So he does a pretty good job, but just to, like, make sure that he sends it home, he kind of dips out of the room before too many people can start asking questions.
He literally ends up limping and stumbling and takes a fall, and he goes on about how when he was younger he took an arrow to the knee. Quick nod to Skyrim fans out there.
Yeah, he's like, makes his, like, story up really quick. He's like, boss, here's my backstory. Go! Make sure everybody knows it.
And so, he literally has bossed, basically roofied this drunk man's drink to make him pass out for the night and not inquire any more questions or raise any suspicions about Kvothe, which speaks a lot about the things he knows and what he's able to do.
But also, like, how far he's willing to go to make sure he's not recognized.
Yeah, he's literally like, all right.
He's drugging someone he doesn't know and, like, making him kind of, like, go away for the night because he does not want to be found out.
Right.
But I think he kind of does, a little bit.
Yeah. I think at the same time, although he's in hiding, wants to remain a low profile,
I think he kind of longs
part of him
for
has
the
that vanity.
life. Yeah, he made himself so famous, and he just has to live in this backwater town. It's kind of sad.
Right. And it kind of shows in a part where Bost asks Kvothe if he's okay, because he took a stumble when he was making up that arrow to the knee story. And he literally tells the student, wow, you're as gullible as the rest of them.
Yeah, so like I said, he's clearly a really good actor.
You know, the rest of the night kind of goes by without incident.
The people, like, just kind of quietly leave. There's no more questioning about who he is.
So it's the next morning, and during the evening, nothing very exciting continued over at the Waystone Inn. The group of travelers that were staying kind of woke up and had breakfast at the inn and made their farewells as they continued to travel on the road. After these travelers had left, Kvothe ends up heading over to the blacksmith, Caleb, and requests a rod of iron, in which Caleb kind of gives him a knowing look and laughs as Kvothe kind of looks down embarrassed because everyone in town has been visiting the blacksmith requesting these iron rods for self-defense since news of the Skrael has come out. And while he was there, Kvothe also requests a leather apron and gloves.
And he passes it off as saying, like, oh yeah, I've got a bramble patch behind my inn that needs clearing away, so I think his plan is to kind of defend himself against the prickly bushes. But we very quickly find out that he wanted the rod of iron and the apron and the gloves to attack the Skrael in the next chapter, but he kind of passed off the iron as being part of this, like, move of superstition in the town, and then also gathered the apron and gloves and like just kind of passed it off as something else. But he's up to something for sure. Yes,
and we'll find out next chapter. Chapter 4, Halfway to Noire.
Noire?
Noire, yeah. I don't know.
I don't know.
It's open to interpretation.
I know. It was like Hermione when it finally came out. Everyone was like, that's how you say it?
Yeah, Hermione.
Hermione, like...
Hermione, that's what it is.
That's what I always thought it was. Or I remember reading a book in middle school, and I think the main character's name was Scipio, but I thought it was Cispio, and I was like, way cooler in my brain. What happened?
I know. There's so many books where you read certain names or titles for things, and you kind of just change what it is to suit your preference. Because I was calling, before I found out the proper pronunciation, I was calling him Kvothe instead of Kvothe.
I think I was too. But he, like, specifically says how it's pronounced in the book.
Right.
So, or, and you and I found this out because we read aloud to each other a lot. there are so many words in fantasy books that I'll just kind of, like, read on the page but not say aloud in my brain. And then when I go to read it out loud to you, I have no clue how
yeah,
to
like,
say.
phonetically, it's
like,
completely different.
I don't actually know how to say that one. Anyway.
Where we last left our heroes.
Noire?
Noire. Well,
I think it's supposed to be a pun on nowhere.
I think so, too.
But anyway.
So we have Chronicler. He's basically been robbed. He's tired, exhausted, hungry, thirsty. He's limping from walking for days because his horse was taken. And he finds this fire roaring in the woods in the dead of night. And he approaches it.
And immediately he, like, thinks it's great. He thinks he's found a house. But then he's like, oh, it's an abandoned house. And there's, like, a sketchy person in it. But he kind of, like, commits to it. And then this is how he ends up finding Kvothe, who we find out eventually who he's been looking for all along. So it's kind of serendipitous that he happened to walk off the trail right into him. Oh yeah, it was serendipitous, but it couldn't have been at, like, a worse time. And Kvothe literally says this because he's basically using this fire and remain of the Skrael to attract the rest of them, because he wants to kind of kill them. He's burning a piece of the Skrael in the fire, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this gets explained a little bit later, but...
Yeah, so the reason he got the wrought iron and the apron and the gloves is to attract them all there and then just, like, obliterate the rest of them.
Right.
With the iron. I'm assuming he's using the iron as a weapon, but...
yes.
I'm not sure if there's any magic involved because we kind of miss out on the action later in the chapter, but I'm getting ahead of myself.
So Kvothe is all decked out. He's got some leather, gloves and apron and clothing on to protect himself because, as we know, the Skrael have these claws that'll just, like, shred you up. And it's kind of hilarious because Kvothe's like, alright, like, you have, like, seconds before these, like, monsters are upon us. Like, put your game face on. And literally right as the action starts, Chronicler somehow takes a digger.
He gets taken out immediately.
Yeah, he, like, cracks his head and, like, passes out.
I know, and he wakes up fairly okay, I think.
Yeah, no, some of the Skrael cut him up while he was out cold, so when he comes to, he's bleeding and he's kind of disoriented, obviously.
But it was also, I think Patrick Rothfuss did this on purpose so we can't see how Kvothe defeats them. Because we don't understand how powerful he is yet. We don't understand what kind of abilities he has yet. And they insinuate that he's just using, like, a rod of iron to, like, beat them up. But I think there was definitely a lot more going on there.
Oh, definitely.
But, of course, like, we miss out on the information because Chronicler, who's acting as the narrator at this point, is passed out.
Right, and Kvothe's still commanding that air of mystery.
Yeah, we don't know who he is.
Yeah,
in this scene.
It's pretty funny. So Chronicler comes to... And Kvothe's already kind of vanquished all these monsters. They're kind of just burning in a giant bonfire with the original one that kind of brought them, or attracted them to Kvothe. We kind of get a little bit more insight onto the folklore of this, where...
Oh yeah, Chronicler makes fun of him.
Yeah, because he's like, what are you doing? And he's burning the Skrael, and he notices that there's different types of wood being used in the fire. And so he kind of quotes this childhood nursery rhyme that talks of using ash, elm, and rowan wood to burn away evil. And so at this point, Kvothe's like, alright, I've literally saved you. You stumbled upon this, and you kind of were dead weight while I had to fight all these guys. The least you can do is kind of help me clean all this up and, come back with me. And since Chronicler's still kind of concussed, he goes to help Kvothe with the rest of the fire and the burning of these monsters and literally passes out again.
Yeah, so he's not helpful at all.
Literally the definition of useless.
But in their conversation, Kvothe does say you'd be surprised at the sorts of things hidden away in children's songs. And we've mentioned this a couple of times already, and this is going to be something we bring up countless times throughout this book, but that is where a lot of the information is hidden in this world.
Yes, so it's definitely a
that was like the first
theme.
Clue as a reader to like pay attention to those.
Yes. And that pretty much wraps up chapter 4. It's action-packed in a way that's not very descriptive, but things do happen pretty quickly.
Chapter 5, Notes. This chapter is extraordinarily short. It is only 3 or 4 pages long. And it begins with Kvothe coming back to Noire, to the Waystone Inn, with Chronicler's body, like, slung across his back, because Chronicler is still passed out.
He's ever useful Chronicler.
He is, I think he's just one of those, like, really nerdy people.
Oh yeah, he's like totally just, I'm the scribe. Like, he does his best, but literally his strengths only include like academic, like,
yeah,
prowess.
I don't think he's ever really had to fight anything, you know?
No.
So, it's a new world for him out here.
Yes.
But anyway, so Kvothe is immediately greeted by Bast, who is so mad at him for just getting this, like, really useless note. Which basically just says, like, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead.
Oh yeah, he comes at him like scorn spouse mode, like, where have you been?
Oh yeah, he's so mad.
To be fair, it is a cryptic note that he leaves. It says, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead.
Yeah,
and, like, that's it.
Kvothe's like, oh, you weren't supposed to find it until this morning, in which case, like, I would have already been home, so I could have gotten rid of the note. But, like, why wouldn't you just leave a better note?
Yeah, that was definitely a jerk move.
I know. I think they definitely have, like, a bantery relationship, but I think this is one of the times where Kvothe, like, didn't really think it through and kind of overlooked how much Bast actually cares for him.
Oh, yes.
And it shows here.
Yeah, because it's more than master and apprentice. They truly have, like, a very intense bond.
Yeah, so Bast is mad, obviously, and he also then, I mean, he's caught up in this emotion, but then catches himself and sees that, like, Kvothe is bloody, and he's carrying someone who's passed out, so then he's like, where did you even go? Like, you couldn't have included me in, like, the fun and the action.
And more importantly, it's like, I could have helped.
He's like, yeah, I could have helped, and you didn't trust me. So, he's really hurt.
Yeah, no, definitely not the best handled situation.
No, and Kvothe kind of tries to deflect by being like, you can still help here, go get your medical kit and, like, help me with this guy.
Yeah.
And we do get this interesting piece where he does ask Bast to go get stuff to do stitches, and Bast is like, oh, I'm not touching your metal needles, I'll go get my bone ones. Once again, a little clue that Bast has got something going on. He's probably not human.
Yeah, he definitely has extreme dislike for anything metal or iron, which is interesting because normal people wouldn't think twice about that, and we'll kind of let that develop within the next few chapters.
Yeah, as for now, we know anything that's averse to iron is a demon, but there's hints, obviously, that Bast is also not a fan of it.
Yeah, and while Bast is kind of taking care of Kvothe and tending to his wounds, he kind of tells Bast everything that went down while he was away, and he lets him know that he killed off 5 of the Skrael, which is very impressive considering the fact that one took down...
they sound terrifying, honestly.
Yeah, one took down just a regular guy on a horse, no problem, so...
Yeah.
Definitely impressive that he single-handedly was able to, 1, defeat 5 of these guys, keep himself alive.
Well, also defend Chronicler, too, who's passed, once again, like I said, passed out, so...
Yeah.
So they go about kind of tidying up their wounds. Bast makes a hint about Kvothe being bloodless and all that.
Yeah, just another homage of his reputation.
Yeah, so we find out later that Kvothe has a nickname, Kvothe the Bloodless. We'll let that develop as it happens later, but Bast's kind of poking fun at it. And then the chapter just ends. Bast sticks his head into Kvothe's room and has this odd little song, or like... It's almost like a lullaby, because Kvothe's in his room, he's exhausted from this kind of encounter with the Skrael and his wounds, and he's just out cold in his room. It almost reminds me of, like, a mom, like, checking in on her sleeping children. Like, it's very... Yeah, it's maternalistic and, like, a very, like, tender moment. And the lullaby, I guess, for lack of a better word, is about, like, watching mortal souls pass away. So this is another huge clue that Bast is... Maybe not human, but also just kind of the same foreboding of, like, the man waiting to die that was mentioned in the prologue. Chapter 6, The Price of Remembering, opens up with Chronicler finally waking up and heading down to the barroom of the inn and meeting Kvothe. Immediately, Chronicler's like, oh wow, it really is you, isn't it? And Kvothe tries to pass it off as like, not being recognized. Yeah, Kvothe's being very nonchalant, but Chronicler has known so much rumor and folklore about Kvothe that he just instantly knew. Yep. And then Kvothe tries to pass it off again and distracts him, saying, like, how's the road to Tinue? And Chronicler's like, oh, that's not where I was going. And then realizes that he's asking about, like, the state of the world and, like, how safe are the roads. So he mentions getting robbed. He said it's, like, kind of, you know, it's okay, but it's not great out there.
the world's slowly going to ruin with the war and these Skrill creatures kind of entering the human world, so things could be much better than they are.
Yeah, so Chronicler has clearly been seeking Kvothe out, and is glad to have found him. He's like, yo, I'm not here to cause you trouble, I'm not here because of the price on your head. Kvothe gets kind of irritated at this, and is like, fine, who the heck are you? What are you doing here? And the guy says, you can call me Chronicler, and Kvothe says, I didn't ask what I could call you, but, like, what's your actual name? And the guy introduces himself as Devin Lockhees. Side note, there is a family that's very important in the world that is the Lockless family, but there are different iterations of their last names. So there's like Lockless, Lockcliffe,
Loki's, Lackless.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if he's related to that family or not, but it's awfully coincidental that his name is so similar.
Yeah, like an outer descendant.
So Kvothe immediately recognizes his name. He's like, oh, you're not any chronicler, you're the chronicler. So this guy's very famous.
Yeah, he's done a lot of written histories of like a lot of famous people in this world. He's written a few books, one of which was, they call it The Mating Habits of the Common Dracus.
And Kvothe mentions reading that.
And so the Dracus itself comes up much later in the story.
Yep. And with this book, The Common Dracus, Chronicler's like, oh yeah, I went looking for a legend, but found just an animal, this lizard. It wasn't anything fantastic, so Kvothe's kind of bitter, and he's like, oh, have you come to prove that I'm not a legend either? Chronicler kind of backtracks, and he's like, no, I was looking for you, we heard a rumor that you might be here. Kvothe ends up figuring out that he was traveling with a man named Scarpy, who Kvothe knows, and he's like, oh, I'm not surprised that he would have been the first to find me. So he's admitting that he is Kvothe at this point, and kind of conceding to the idea that Chronicler is here to get some kind of information about him. But Kvothe ends up just kind of playing the innkeeper and is like, can I get you something to eat, something to drink? Can I get you a room? And Chronicler kind of calls him out and is like, I thought you were Kvothe the Fearless. Why were you hiding behind this disguise of being an innkeeper? Kvothe's kind of mad. He's like, I've never been fearless. Only fools are fearless. And Chronicler's like, I didn't come here to make you scared. I came here because I was looking for information. Won't you can just even consider talking to me? And Kvothe is immediately on the defense. He's like, that was a long time ago. I'm someone different now. I'm not Kvothe. I'm Coat. I tend to my inn. Yeah,
because he's clearly, emotionally defeated, but I think a really large part of these books and what's fascinating is we get all these rumors and stories of legend that surround Kvothe and characters in this book, and what actually happens and how it happens are two totally different things. So we hear about, Kvothe the Arcane, Kvothe the Bloodless, and, people assume that it's, these extraordinary feats, and they end up becoming extraordinary and, powerful and amazing, but the way in which it happens isn't what you expect, which is really fascinating.
Right. And so they're getting to the point where Chronicler's trying to get to the bottom of these stories.
Yeah, he's kind of goading him.
The man behind the myth. And yeah, he is goading him. Kvothe kind of challenges him and is like, what could you offer me that's worth my remembering? I don't want to go through the pain of remembering my whole story. Chronicler, instead of trying to answer that, just pushes him and is like, everyone thinks you're dead. People say you're a myth. They say you never existed. And some news stories about you just kind of call you, a killer, a coward. Kvothe takes this very hard.
Yeah, he gets wicked angry.
And the last thing that Chronicler says is, some people say that you're the newest addition to the Chandrian. And Kvothe is so upset about this. He ends up becoming extraordinarily angry, especially, once again, when Chronicler challenges him and says, some people say there was a woman. At this point, Kvothe kind of, becomes so angry, the room grows quiet, and he has this terrible look about him, and, a bottle shatters, a bottle of strawberry wine, and Chronicler becomes, terrified. He's like, this is the first time I've stepped into a story versus just writing them down, and he's awed. Yeah, no,
this part is awesome in the fullest definition of the word, because he really pushes Kvothe too far, and literally there's an entire, energy shift in the room. When you said, the bottle shatters, there's a whole, it's more than just, an emotional feeling. There's literally an energy in the room emanating from Kvothe, and Chronicler even thinks to himself, he's like, how in the world could I have even thought this is just an ordinary innkeeper? Like,
yeah, it's crazy. And the fact that it is a bottle of strawberry wine, just take note of which characters later end up becoming associated with that. That's a clue.
Yeah.
But Chronicler's thinking about these, like, stories he knows about Kvothe and trying to reconcile them with this, like, terrifying person he's seen. He talks about how Kvothe went looking for his heart's desire, but had to trick a demon to get it, and then was forced to fight an angel to keep it. And for the first time, Chronicler's like, I could believe that. This man is, like, powerful and terrifying and has such a command about him. I could actually believe that happening. And at the end, he kind of convinces Kvothe by basically saying that, like, people only know what they're told, and unless you tell your story, your reputation is going to be this confusing one. It's going to be this one where people say that maybe you're the villain, that maybe you're the newest Chandrian. So he's kind of holding that against Kvothe. Like,
he's almost holding his story for ransom.
Yeah, he literally says, you're holding my story hostage against me.
Yeah.
And Chronicler offers himself as the only way for the truth to come out and have a clear, full beginning to end story of, like, who Kvothe is, how he became this way, what he actually did, what's true, what's fake, what started as one thing and through rumor and gossip and, like, mythologizing became another thing about his life. And so this is his chance to set the record straight. Kvothe kind of calms back down and looks like the kind of meek innkeeper he is again, and Chronicler's very confused by this transition, but knows that the real Kvothe is still in there and is able to tell his story.
I think a really cool adjective that they do in the story, too, is that anytime Kvothe is either, like, happy or sad or upset or angry, there's this change in his pupil color that goes from these bright blade green grass shades in his eye to almost a charcoal dark green forest looking.
Yeah, like
upset.
A steely green. Like, you can kind of read him through his eyes, which is cool. So he eventually agrees and negotiates with Chronicler, because Chronicler offers him 1 or 2 days, and Kvothe demands I need 3 days to tell my story. Chronicler's kind of confused. He's like, 3 days is a lot, and Kvothe is kind of saying, like, is it really that much? But the way the book is written is that book 1 is day 1 of Kvothe's story, book 2 is day 2 of him telling a story, and book 3 will be day 3. And then the chapter ends with Chronicler finally calling him Kvothe by his name. He'd been calling him Kote up to that point. And Kvothe just straight up says, yes, I am. And this is the first time he's reconciling his old identity with his new identity. And that will be how he, goes into the story.
Right. So officially now, Kvothe's story is truly beginning. We've kind of gotten a nice background of this world and some of the characters that inhabit it, and maybe some more of, like, the fantastic elements that incorporate it. But now, like, officially, we are entering the story of Kvothe in his life.
Yeah, the true beginning. So the book kind of starts at the end, obviously, because it's not the end of his life, but where he is now. And we're going to go back and start from the beginning. Chapter 7 of Beginnings and the Names of Things. And this is going to be the last chapter in our first episode, because this is where Kvothe, he starts his story, but doesn't fully start telling it until the next chapter. So this is a good introduction to where the story begins.
Right.
So in the chapter itself, Kvothe kind of asks Chronicler how people go about telling their stories, and he says, I'll record things as I tell them, and then I'll edit it out and simplify and clarify. And Kvothe gets mad about
his methods, basically.
The methods. He wants it to be his own words only. He doesn't want things getting cut out or edited. So Kvothe is like, well, how fast can you write? Can you write down everything I say? And Chronicler's like, yeah, I do. I have this method. It's basically like shorthand.
Yeah.
Or what is it that secretaries used to use?
Yeah, it's shorthand.
Is that what it's called? Yeah, so it's like lines and dashes. Chronicler's really proud of this method that he's come up with, and this is kind of his key to success, I think.
Yeah, he's developed it himself. It's his own.
Yeah, so I think that's why he's been able to record so many famous people's stories and gather so much information and become, like, a really famous chronicler. And
so in classic Kvothe fashion, he kind of says show me, has Chronicler kind of put it to the test. And Kvothe literally just spews nonsense.
Yeah, I was gonna say, he says, like, a bunch of words. He even says made-up words and words in other languages and, like, a little silly, like, rhyme, and makes Chronicler write it all down, like, word for word. Immediately, figures out, like, oh, the vertical lines are vowels, the horizontal lines are consonants, and Chronicler's kind of, like, miffed that he figures even that out. And then, basically, Kvothe messes around with it for, like, I think, half an hour or so, and immediately figures out the entire system, and Chronicler's not happy.
Yeah, but it's like...
But also very impressed.
It's amazing, because basically this shorthand language that Chronicler developed is all phonetic. So he doesn't have to worry about necessarily spelling things. It's just kind of like these dots, lines, dashes are simplified for the way people speak. And when Kvothe kind of cracks the code on this written language, Chronicler then says, "Is it true you really learned the Temic language in a day?" And that's like another famous Kvothe story. And it just kind of goes in...
Kvothe says, "Oh, I learned it in a day and a half, actually. It wasn't a day. And I didn't learn all of it, just enough for what I needed." So this is where you're starting to see the breakdown between what Kvothe actually did and what the world thinks he's done. And that will kind of be the continuation throughout the story as he breaks down everything he did in his life.
That, and it's just another kind of feather in the cap to his greatness, where he could totally just decipher this whole invented written system of chroniclers in like half an hour, and in a day and a half he learned to speak a different language. Like, this guy is brilliant.
Yeah, he's absolutely genius. But once they figure that out, Kvothe is pretty much ready to tell his story. Before he begins, says, like, I've never told my life story before. It's very important that you get it all down. And you have to remember that I am of the Edemaru, these people who have been telling stories before there were books, before there was music, before time. We have been telling stories. Like, we are the original storytellers, so you have to respect how I tell my story.
Yeah, there's a reverence and kind of sacredness in the act of him revealing his story.
Yep, and he even says, like, if I'm wandering or straying, or remember that stories don't always take a direct path, so just follow what I say word for word. So he begins his story. At first he's kind of all over the place. He's like, it begins when I heard her singing. And then he goes, no, it began at the university. And then he says, no, I guess true beginnings lies in what led me to the university. So it begins with the Chandrian. So he's not really sure where to start. And he kind of shakes his head and, like, regrounds himself. Yeah,
and so this part's actually kind of something that I love, was he then says, it really kind of starts with me. That's where all the story starts. And so he then kind of goes into his names. And within this story and series, names are just so important. They hold a lot of power to who people are.
I mean, even the book name is the name of the wind. So you know that, like, names and naming are very important and powerful. So the fact that he has collected so many is fascinating, and he goes through a bunch of them rapid fire. If you want to talk about those a little bit.
Yeah, no, this part's awesome. So he said, I've had many names, more names than anyone has a right to. The Edem had called him Maedre, which, depending on how it's spoken, can mean the flame, the thunder, or the broken tree. He then talks about how the flame is kind of attributed to the fact that he has true red hair.
I think he's deflecting at this point. He's like, oh yeah, the flame, because my hair's red. But I think...
No, it's much more,
It's
obviously.
much more than that. He's just being kind of straightforward and a little tongue-in-cheek at this point.
Yes, and, with the flame, the thunder, there's a lot of instances later where Kvothe's reputation and stories about how he's called down fire and lightning like Tarbalin the Great, so that's kind of a interesting nod. The thunder could also attribute to his strong baritone and when he was singing and performing in his troupe at an early age. People in his life had different names for him as well. He also earned a lot of names such as Lightfinger, Six String, Kvothe the Bloodless, Kvothe the Arcane, Kvothe Kingkiller. He then kind of summarizes the fact that his parents named him Kvothe, and as a boy he learned that it meant to know, which is a huge part of who he is, because he's just very intelligent and can never be satisfied. He always wants to learn something new and grow, develop, and push himself. And so with the end of this chapter, we get this really cool kind of sequence of historic deeds and accomplishments of his life. It says he's stolen princesses back from sleeping barrel kings. He burned down the town of Trayvon. He He spent his night with Florian and left with both his sanity and his life. He was expelled from the university at a younger age than most people are accepted in. He tread paths by moonlight where others feared to speak during the day, and he talked to gods, loved women, and written songs that made the minstrels weep. And it's just an awesome way to just start the story.
Yeah, and some of the things that he talks about are really straightforward. And you and I have both read the book, so I'm trying not to give too much away, but some of the statements he made about things that he's done are very clear, and some of them have double meanings.
Yeah.
And I think that's really fascinating, and it's not knowing how the trilogy ends because the third book is out yet. A lot of people use this paragraph to kind of predict how all the pieces of the series will fall into place eventually, and trying to figure out who the characters are that he's mentioning in here and the acts that he's doing and how they'll all piece together in the end. I think this is a hugely important clue to the story, especially because it is what is also written on the back of the book. So I think it's really fascinating that he started with, like, kind of his legends, and then he's going to break it all down moving forward. But that's where we're going to end this episode. The next set of chapters we're going to work on will be chapters 8 through 15.
Until then, stay happy and healthy, and happy listening.
And if anyone has any comments or predictions that they want to get in touch with, you can feel free to reach out in the meantime through Facebook or our webpage. This podcast was recorded by Anna Opushinsky and Sam Furman, edited by Anna Opushinsky, produced by Anna Opushinsky and Sam Furman, with webpage and artwork designed by Anna Opushinsky.
Goldenrise Media.